What up, YouTube? Here with a post-fight video of the Tszyu versus Brian Mendoza fight. Now, before I give y'all the summary of what happened in the fight, I'm going to tell y'all the results first. Tszyu was able to retain the WBO Super Welterweight title in his first defense of the WBO Super Welterweight title after being crowned the WBO Super Welterweight champion after it was vacated when Jermell Charlo, formerly undisputed Super Welterweight champion, decided to step up to Super Middleweight to challenge Canelo Alvarez for the undisputed Super Middleweight title. And then the number one ranked contender, who was Tszyu, the WBO gave Tszyu the title as soon as they had Jermell Charlo vacate the WBO Super Welterweight title. And if y'all remember, earlier this year, they were scheduled to fight Tszyu and Jermell Charlo was. However, Jermell Charlo suffered an injury during his training camp. I think it was his left hand that was injured, hence why that fight was taken out of schedule from its original date that they were supposed to fight for the undisputed Super Welterweight title. And when Jermell Charlo recovered and decided to take the fight with Canelo Alvarez instead of defending his undisputed Super Welterweight title versus his originally scheduled opponent in Tszyu, that's how Tszyu became the WBO Super Welterweight champion. And in his first defense, he took on Brian Mendoza, who defeated former WBC interim Super Welterweight champion Sebastian Fundora in what is still considered to be a strong candidate to be this year's knockout of the year. And it was a upset for sure. And Brian Mendoza can also win the Upset of the Year award for 2023 as well, with the victory he got over on Sebastian Fundora when they have fought. And that put Brian Mendoza on notice with the boxing public after that emphatic statement-making victory over on Sebastian Fundora, and definitely catapult Brian Mendoza to be a legitimate contender amongst the super welterweight division. And this fight was a one-sided fight. I didn't make a preview video and upload it. However, I did post on the community post on my channel that I was picking Tszyu to stop Brian Mendoza in the later rounds. That didn't happen because this went the full distance of 12 rounds, and I had the fight scored 117 to 111 in favor of Tszyu, going to show ya that this fight was a one-sided fight, a dominant, impressive performance on the side of Tszyu. And Tszyu did make it clear that he wants to step outside of his home country in Australia, where he's had majority of his fights hosted at, and he's built himself a reputation and a name of his own out there where he's from in Australia. And of course, him having the Tszyu last name and his father, Costa Tszyu, being a former champion himself, that name has a legacy on its own, and that definitely helped Tszyu get noticed not only locally out there in Australia, however, amongst boxing fans because of the last name that he carries and his whole come up before he even became champion was trying to build a reputation of his own, and him building a name of his own without it being attached to what his father accomplished when Tszyu was in his prime during his career, which was successful, by the way. And Tszyu, he's done a good job. He's still unbeaten, and now that he's champion, he did say during the post-fight interview that he would like to fight outside of the Australian market, and he's already fought in the U.S. before. I think it was 2 fights ago prior to this fight that he had a fight in America. It was last year when he made his American debut, and he defeated Terrell Gauja via unanimous decision in his American debut. And all the other fights he fought in Australia. And matter of fact, it wasn't 2 fights ago when he made his American debut versus Gaucha. That was 3 fights ago. And ever since then, in his last fight, he defeated Carlos Ocampo in an impressive knockout win. And then 2 fights ago, he defeated Tony Harrison, former super welterweight champion, who's got a victory over on the current unified majority champion at super welterweight, Jermell Charlo, when they fought. And he is considered a veteran, and Tszyu TKO'd him when they fought, and he had that back-to-back TKO victories that he had heading into this fight. And in this fight versus Brian Mendoza, he wasn't able to score a knockout like he would have liked to, and as many fans that was in attendance and that was watching and spectating this fight was expecting or was wanting to see happen, Brian Mendoza is a durable fighter who's got a chin on him, and it lasted, and he was able to endure the heavy shots that was coming from Tszyu. It was taking its toll on Mendoza, and it was wearing him out, and the accumulation of punishment was showing on Brian Mendoza, especially during the later rounds when Tszyu's shots was showing its effects on Mendoza. And during the breaks in between the rounds, especially in the later rounds, as I had said, Mendoza's corner would ask Mendoza, is he in the shape to continue fighting? And Mendoza showed resilience and fortitude and his will to not give up and continue fighting regardless of the fact that he was behind on the scorecards by a wide margin. And him and his team knew that. And Mendoza, regardless of the fact that he wasn't able to have this fight go the way how he wanted to, and regardless of the fact that the accumulation of shots and punishment that was coming from Tszyu and it taking its toll on his body, he didn't want to quit, and he wanted to go the distance and last the full championship round, showing that he could hang in there with the best of them despite all the situations and circumstances that was going on during this fight. And Tszyu, he showed technical improvements in this fight with his patience and his ability to pick and place his shots at the right time and being more accurate and observing with his punches. And when he finds the right momentum to attack relentlessly, he would seize the opportunity when it's presented at a perfect time, and I thought that was a heck of an improvement from Tszyu displayed in this fight. And as I said, he wants to brandish himself and branch out there to different markets, and he wants to have his next fights being hosted in America, and he let it be known that he doesn't have any interest in wanting to continue having his fights being hosted in Australia, where he's been fighting throughout his whole professional career, other than that one fight that he had in America. And that's how you know he's pursuing that fight versus Jermell Charlo for the undisputed super welterweight title, which most likely is going to happen next year. And I think it's pretty much a guarantee that this undisputed super welterweight title fight is going to happen, because they were agreeing with one another that this fight was going to happen earlier this year. The only reason, as I mentioned earlier, why this fight didn't go down is because Jermell Charlo hurt his hand during his training camp leading up to the fight versus Tszyu that was supposed to happen earlier this year. That's why I say it's pretty much a guarantee, and hopefully it will be both Tszyu and Jermell Charlo's next immediate fight. And undisputed title fights has been happening frequently for the sport of boxing, especially for this year, and hopefully they continue that for next year and the future for the sport of boxing, because it's a good look for the sport of boxing. It revitalizes the scene, and it makes the competitive scene in the sport of boxing in its current stages very much healthy, and it gives the sport of boxing the reputation and the feel that it's been missing for quite a while now, because boxing during its heydays had a reputation of the best fighting the best, and then I would say after the 80s, starting in the early to mid 90s, that's when promoters started. I can't say it's only on the promoters. It was also due to the fact that fighters weren't being produced as much as back in the 80s and 70s, after, especially as I said, from the 90s and onwards. And then with the talents not being as much focused on as the previous fighters from the past generations, and they started to take advantage of the lack of competition and being more money savvy and being more focused on the promotional business aspects of the game instead of the pure competition of the sport. And that hurt and damaged the reputation and the growth and development of the sport of boxing. And they started taking more easy fights to collect wins to add to their resume and make their name more marketable and to get more easy money. And as long as they kept on collecting wins, they would have their market value increase and their name would draw more money by getting easier wins instead of fighting the tougher competition who is on the same level as them. And that kept going until I would say after 2020. And boxing, I would say from 2022 all the way till this year, has been producing the fights that gave that feel of boxing during its heydays, with the best fighting the best, and with the modern era having more than one champion at one weight class, that complicated on who is the best at a specific division, because of boxing title sanctioning bodies having its hands on the sport of boxing, and it being recognized as a legitimate title for the divisions that is official in the sport of boxing. And with it having more than one champion, matter of fact, excluding the lineal title, there's 4 major sanctioning bodies, title organizations in the sport of boxing for each and every division. And that's what made it difficult to determine, and it made it easier for top level fighters to avoid each other and having the title of being champion without fighting the best. And it gave them space to cherry pick their opponents due to boxing having different title organizations for every division, and every organization for each championship title has their own rankings and has their own way of ranking their contenders and making fights happen and how they do business. And that has been a damaging factor to the sport of boxing. And that, as I said, made it difficult for the boxing enthusiasts to determine who is in fact the best fighter at a respective weight class. And then recently, as I said, promoters, sanctioning bodies, and fighters in their camps has been working together to come to mutual terms to make these undisputed title fights happen, instead of having 3 or 4 different champions at the same weight class. We're seeing more undisputed, one champion for each weight class. And as I said, that is a revitalizing, healthy, good look for the sport of boxing. And Tszyu versus Jermell Charlo is yet another one of those fights that the boxing public would most definitely like to see happen. And both fighters are in their primes and are top level, high quality fighters. And this fight, as I said, was been supposed to happen, and it's most likely gonna happen if they agree to fight each other. And it was scheduled to happen, then it shouldn't be any problems with them coming to terms again to make a fight that was supposed to happen and was agreed upon to happen later next year. And it's definitely a fight to look out for. And Tszyu, as I said, this was yet another impressive performance and another victory that is a good look added onto his resume, defeating Brian Mendoza, who came up from out of nowhere and jumped on to the top of the super welterweight division as a legitimate contender. And he, as I said, didn't have his best performance in this fight. He couldn't keep up with the movement, and he couldn't keep up with the pace and the accumulation of shots from Tszyu, and he didn't have the right defense. He didn't have the right movements, and he didn't have the fluidity to avoid these shots from Tszyu. However, there's always room for a bounce back fight for Brian Mendoza, and this definitely doesn't hurt Mendoza because Tszyu is a champion and has been considered that for much longer than Brian Mendoza has. And that's why I say this shouldn't hurt Brian Mendoza as much as most people would say it hurts a fighter to lose a championship fight. Anyways, that does it for this post-fight video. Y'all let me know what y'all opinions are from what y'all saw from this fight. And share, subscribe, like, all that good stuff. And click the links in the description to show y'all support. Anything would be appreciated. And I'm out of here. Peace.